So I'm going to share with you just three main areas to do with effective presentation. And I'm glad that you're all here and that you're interacting with your thumbs up and that you can hear me clearly. I want to talk about three main areas to do with presenting, and I want to deal with presenting both online, like I'm doing now, and offline when we return to the stage. And I want to talk about sourcing information in this digital age, tuning our delivery, and sharing the storyline. The first one relates to content being important whenever we're presenting. Tuning the delivery is also important. So the manner in which you present is important. And so is the structure of your ideas as you build a storyline or a through line. So I'm going to use the term through line. There's a little bit of advertising if you want to know more about me. So the through line, the storyline is important, but how you deliver it and how you source your information is very important. So in the next 30 minutes, I want to look at these three areas. Sourcing information is extremely important, and you and I know with Auntie and Uncle Google that we can find all kinds of information, but we need to consider what we want to do first as we present. Do we have a story to share? Or perhaps we need to also consider a series of images that we want to weave, or are we going to advocate a position? So we need to think about our presentation and the purpose of it and reflect on why. And this is also related to the fact that if you are going to go into public speaking competitions, as I know many of you are interested in, you will find that they usually use general prompts. The same as what we've given you for today, for the demonstrations. So one of the first things to do is play with how general or specific you want to be in what you want to say. And look at sources which may give you examples of how to deal with this information, like TED Talks. So TED Talks are very defined. They're never more than 17 minutes. And there's some very good TED Talks on how to give TED Talks. But also there are TED Talks that are very good on public speaking itself. And there's also EdTED, which uses animations, but shows you some good examples of how to structure information. Now, in sourcing, I know everybody wants to use Google. But Google is just one search engine, very dominant, but just one search engine. And as I will show you later, Google is but a small part of the information that is on the web. So you really want to read as well and climb out of the Google well. You know, there's a Chinese story about being stuck in the well and thinking it's the whole ocean. So when you're sourcing information, use other search engines and search grammar. And that includes images. Take this image, for example, of this handsome guy, who I know quite well because it's me. And you will see here is an image, but we don't really know where this image comes from. So if we're sourcing, we need to think, how real is an image? Because as Netzians, we need to be digitally literate and source with critical awareness. You want to go beyond the cliches and know the reality of your source. And this is both words and images. And don't just become a WhatsApp recycling auntie or uncle. You know, I got this one from my auntie, must be true. So use reality checks when you're sourcing information. So say, for example, you use an image, as I do here. You could source this image online, even though it's my photograph, and so I haven't sourced referenced it. So in this poem that I wrote, I'm going to take the liberty of sharing a poem. Inside my hurricane country head, parts of who I am and was, blown off course by sweeping moves of changes unplotted, synapse firing syllables, struggling to be heard. So you could source this image and you'll find out it's Rodin's The Thinker. And so you would know the reality of the image or whether I just made it on Photoshop. So use a reality check. Include searching for images on Google Images where you can search. And know that sometimes with information, what we present is knowing what to ignore. What are the important sources of information that add to my storyline, that add to what I want to say from beginning to end, and how real are they? So search the sources for how real they are on places like this. Snoops is a great one for all those forwards of forwards of forwards of forwards that you get on WhatsApp. So here's my question to you. What is wrong here? Can you type in the chat box, what is wrong here? Okay. So we're getting answers to do with the form of the language. Yes, thank you very much. Taken off the internet without double checking the sources. Very good point. Worse still, what is wrong is not so much the content I'm thinking of here, but what is wrong is I never credited the sources. So this is, as one of my colleagues says, this is plagiarism. If I don't acknowledge my source, so even when you're public speaking, if you want to get people to buy into your argument, you've really got to make sure they know, they can see that your information is real and has a source. Now, this is why we need to see that information sourcing involves much more than Google. And what I'd like you to do is to go onto your phone or go onto another platform if you can, and type in this website, because what I want to show you is that people think I just Google it and I've got it all, but it's more complex than that. Can you take a minute and go on to type in and go on to this website and have a look, explore. Okay. Why did I do this? First of all, this website is managed by Tim Werner, basically the founder of the internet. And now what's this all about? You will notice lots of statistics, right? The live statistics. And what I'd like to say is that in sourcing, it's really important that you go beyond Google search, especially with Google search when the first two pages are often manufactured by their AI to make money. Sourcing, very important. Be critically literate when you're researching information for your presentations. I'd like to now tune into the second part, moving from sourcing to tuning. So remember, we've got three major areas we're looking at: sourcing, tuning, and sharing the storyline. Coming into tuning. Now, in psychology, we talk about the primacy effect. And this is when you first see something, that is when you often judge a person. It's like when you go on a date, you know, the first impressions really matter. You go, oh, wow. Or you go, not so interesting. And so the first impressions are really important. So I'd like to now talk about tuning and make some reference to online presentation. So we all have online identities, and now increasingly, we are going to find that presenting online will not go away with COVID, which we hope happens very soon, because presenting online is going to be part of recruiting with video portfolios. So this part is going to look very much at online presenting and tuning in. And it's all to do with stage fright. Here's a young woman who you may have heard of. So Taylor Swift says, and if you haven't heard of Taylor Swift, I don't know which rock you've been living under. So the first one says, every time you play another show, it gets better and better. So in tuning our story, it's really a lot to do with preparation and practice. And this is also to deal with how do you deal with the nerves. You've got to prepare and you've got to practice. And online, this relates to the image you project, the use of your eyes, especially now we have to wear these masks, but they not so much soon, the eyes, and the tuning of sounds. So today, because we've only got short time, I'm going to focus very much on the tuning of the sounds that we use. Now, some sounds we can't control very much. You know, I have a New Zealand accent, but I'm not about to change that, and you shouldn't. But there are certain things that we can tune with sounds, and I'd like to now talk about the tuning part of being an effective presenter. First of all, it's getting the syllable stress of words right. Photo, photograph, photographer, photography. Inside the parts of that word, I am putting different volume. So this is important in accuracy. And one of the other major things, and singers all know this, good singers know this, is a bit of concentration on word-ending sounds. Word-ending sounder. Word-ending sounds. But related to tuning your message is the fact that as we listen, we usually listen for the words which are louder because our mind, by its nature, in the kind of languages that English is especially, will stress the most important information. Our mind will stress the most important information. Our mind will stress the most important information when it's hearing. But we're listening to an increase in volume. And so with the tuning, we need to consider what words we want to emphasize to increase the volume on. We call this framing in applied linguistics. And it's also related to how much space you leave around a word. Let's take a classic sentence I often use to illustrate this, and causing all kinds of problems if I look at the wrong attractive lady in the audience. So, is it I really love you? I really love you. I really love you, not just like. I really love you, not the one you saw me with last night. So this kind of content word stress is so important that if I have a prepared speech to give and I have to follow a script, I highlight in color the important words. So I know that I'm going to increase the volume slightly on the important words. Now, with tuning for the listener, what is also important is the overall timing of your journey, because what we're looking at here in any presentation is sharing your story and showing your reader where you're going. So you're tuning in their understanding. And that includes framing. And by framing, I mean the use of pauses and also the use of signals to your listener. So at the moment, I'm talking about tuning for the listener. And of course, this helps sometimes with videos now. We can practice and see how we're using our own pausing. And speed is important too, because if you talk fast the whole time, you take the learner, you take the listener on this journey and you go rapidly, in the end you'll lose them because they'll just find everything's going at the same pace. So you also want to consider what you're doing with pausing and speed. So here's the step thing. Stress. And I don't mean, oh, I'm so stressed. Wow, I'm so stressed. I don't mean that kind of stress. I mean, you're putting extra effort on the important content words. And you're considering the timing of your delivery. If you want to speed up what you're saying, you're going to build excitement. But if you do it too often, you don't give them time to think. And this is to do with the emphasis as you share your journey with the listener.
Stephen, come back again.
Okay. Turn off your mic. Thank you. Turn off your mic. And then we have pausing. Yeah, so it's very important that you also consider pausing, because that gives the listener time to think. But you don't want ums and ahs. So Toastmasters, for example, wonderful organization for speaking. Toastmasters knows that you don't want ums and ahs, and you don't want too many unnecessary pauses. But on the other hand, you don't want the machine gun thing that you sometimes get with Singaporean speakers. So we've talked about sourcing information, being critical, tuning your listener's awareness. And I'd like to now move to the third part, which is sharing the story, sharing the through line, taking your listener on the journey of what you want to talk about. Now, this can be a kind of way of thinking that applies to both writing and speaking. And I know that sometimes you're well aware of the hook to get the audience in. But so often in this competition, and this is now the 14th, well, not a competition now, but this session, this is the 14th one I've participated in. So often people spoil their hook and their character building or their scene creation at the beginning by saying, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges, I am here this morning to talk to you about, which is all a pretty useless waste of time because we already know the person's there. So you launch into it, and what you want to do in sharing a story is to create some curiosity or inner questions as you go along, but signpost the journey. Remember to make some pictures in the listener's head. A little bit of description helps sometimes, so don't go too general. And end with what you want to end with. And perhaps link the end back to what you did at the beginning. In writing, we call it the hamburger model, but that's another story. And remember that as soon as you speak, each of us is original and we have our own voice. And when you find it, your story will be told. You will be heard. This is John Grierson. He's written 1 or 2 best-selling books. Here's another formula from a wonderful educator called Sir Keith Robinson on TED Talks. Now, if it's a 3-minute talk or a 17-minute TED Talk, the same principle applies. And he draws a parallel, an analogy with essay writing and says a good essay answers 3 questions. What? So what? Now what? So this is for more than TED Talks. And I'd like to recommend here a wonderful book. Yes, remember, books are still alive. Reading is okay. Doesn't have to all be TikTok. So here we have Ted Anderson making these points in the official TED Guide to Public Speaking, although he has a TED Talk on TED Talks too. Before you start, the storyline's got to be there, right? Am I passionate about this topic? Did I get my audience interested? But if you use a hook, make sure you link the hook into the story. Don't have it hanging out there like some lovely durian that's unopened. You've got to link it back. Is this a new story? Is this something for your audience where they're going to get something new? They don't want to hear Martin Luther King's speech for the 16,000th time, even though Martin Luther King is important. So we want to avoid cliches and provide the listeners with a fresh novel story, building engagement through what TED Talks calls the through line. Is there enough detail to build a picture? Are you credible? In other words, do you know your sources? You can even acknowledge your sources. And have you thought through what you're going to present, that you can actually condense it to a 12 or 20 word story, elevator pitch? Yeah? Like for those of us who've done doctorates, you usually get people ask you, what was your doctorate in? And you have it down to a 20-word story for those who are not really interested. So in the same way, if you're going to give a presentation, have you got your core idea, your core storyline worked out in your head so you can put it into 20-word thing? Because that means you will have thought about what is your main message, especially if it's a 3-minute or 4-minute or 5-minute talk. You don't want to be rejected by your audience. You don't want to feel lonely. So you want to have a good mix of good sources, good delivery or tuning, and a storyline. And know yourself. If you're thinking about preparing for a presentation, sometimes you may get a thought at the wrong time. Write it down when you get it. And practice by finding a critical listener or reader. Because as you go on the journey of presentation, you want to be able to share your journey. You want to have good sources. You want to have the delivery well organized. You want to have practice, and you want to take them on a journey like this young boy towards the cliffs in the distance. This is my hometown of Gisborne, New Zealand. Practice and polish. Pilot with a critical friend. Get them to be the audience before you go in front of the public with all their eyes. And use phone recording. I can't emphasize enough how useful hearing your own voice is, because we never sound to others like we sound to ourselves, because we're hearing through our skull. Others are just hearing our voice in the air. So rework and revisit a presentation. Reflect on your non-verbals. I have a tendency to do this a lot, but since I'm online, I don't do it so much. Otherwise, it becomes a blur, you know? And sometimes I'm a bit like a mad Italian taxi driver, you know, you communicate, you use your hands a lot. You don't want to watch how you use them and be conscious of it. And enjoy and be enthusiastic. If you don't feel passionate about what you're going to talk about, don't do it. Be passionate and convey that. Because you have to overcome this. This is, notice my source for my image. This is what happens with public speaking. Forget about the butterflies in the stomach. It's usually crocodiles. Yeah, this is, of course, is a lovely Malaysian crocodile. And how do we get over this? First of all, we make sure that we have worked out what is the story we want to share. we make sure that we practice, and I've practiced for today as well. And we make sure that we've already thought about what do we want to achieve with the presentation, having gone to good sources, having practiced the delivery, and having worked out our storyline. Once we have the framework clearly in our mind, the nervousness becomes less. The boyas in the belly are not so active. So we breathe, we start, and we plan. Know that the audience wants you to succeed. That's the self-affirmation. Everyone wants to have a good time listening to you. Do a dry run. I did one this morning, fueled by my necessary coffee. Make sure the setup is there. When you go on stage, sometimes I'd get there early, go in and look at the stage, know where I'm going to stand. And it's the same, where are you putting your image when you're online? You notice I'm using down the bottom here. And breathe at the beginning. Really practice the start, because you get the start right, you can calm down the crocs in the tummy. And take your listeners on a journey, sharing a through line, as the TED Talks founder Chris Anderson talks about. Take them on the through line of your presentation, making sure that the end is an affirmation of what you started with, making sure your sources are good, your delivery is variable, and you have a story to share. And I look forward to hearing your stories later in our interactive sessions. And I'll stop sharing the screen now. Thank you very much for listening. So this is me, Prof Stephen Hall from Center for English Language Studies at Sunway University. And it's such a pleasure to once again be part of the Oxford and Cambridge Society English Language event. And this is our 20th year. So thank you for being here. And I'll now look forward to taking some questions and hand you back to the capable hands of Naomi.
Thank you, Prof Stephen, for your insightful sharing. It's Q&A session time. So if anyone has any questions, you may write it in the chat box, or you can actually unmute and you can actually ask Prof Stephen. So take this opportunity to ask as much as you can. Anyone, any questions?
Could I ask a question?
Yes,
Go ahead.
Sure.
Could you elaborate on how to attract the audience's attention? Because I've always had a very big problem with that. Sometimes my speeches end up a little bit boring. So could you offer some advice?
Well, you remember I just spoke about the primacy effect, that the first thing that the audience sees, they're going to judge you, right? So you're probably right in thinking that this is a very important part of a presentation. So my thing is that let me do the what not to do's, because we get a lot of the not what to do's. A general statement that's kind of abstract, that doesn't really create an image in a listener's mind, is not going to work very well. So let me give you an example just off the top of my head, yeah, because we've all just been going through all this COVID horrors. And I was asked sometimes, I was asked about COVID by one of my students. Have you felt that, you know, there are moments when life is really not worth it, and it's really dull? And I said, whenever I get any of those thoughts, I want you to just picture this. I am sitting in a house and I see a roof of a house fly past my window as the tree collapses from the force of a cyclone in the front yard of where I was living. The driving rain was so strong, I could barely see the tree as it crashed, but I heard the sound. And I thought, I'm so glad I am alive in amongst all this. So during COVID, having experienced something like that, I think, hey, this isn't so difficult after all, just being stuck in a house. At least I have electricity, because I lived for 2 weeks in a country where the hurricane literally did happen. And so this is it's not such a big deal for me. What I tried to do there, just to give you that example, was to weave an image. So I find that actually speaking from yourself or weaving an image in the listener's mind is a very useful way. So it doesn't matter if I can just answer some of the things in the chat, Naomi, here. You're a more serious person, CR Lie, and I don't know how to crack a joke to get attention. It's not always cracking jokes that gets attention. I do that a bit, but I think I'm a bit of a joker. So I'm not like Batman Joker, by the way. So the thing is here is not necessarily to make your speech less serious, but if you want to be serious, to share some very interesting piece of information related to your topic that people go, wow, I never thought of that. And so that's where sourcing and researching is important. Now, when I'm going down another question, this links up to what topic will actually impress audience and the judges. It's not just the topic that matters. So when we're looking at what is an effective presentation, we have the matter, what we call the matter, the content, yeah? So we would usually pick a general topic, but you have to add your own voice to it. So your content has to be something that comes from you. There's that. So it's not just the topic that will impress the audience and the judges. It's also the manner in which you deliver the information. You might have the most wonderful topic in the world, but if you go too fast and you're too dense and people are not really hearing any variation of what you're talking about, you're not going to have anybody really interested. So the thing is, you need to look at your content, your topic. The personal voice can be very powerful. The well-researched, interesting can be powerful. Then you've got to consider your delivery, how you share these ideas, how you share the image making. And then you've got to think about the structure of it. When we actually have the competition and we judge, we also have quite a few marks, 20 out of 100, for establishing credibility. And that is also a way in which, as judges, we look at the overall impression that you make with an audience. So this is where practice is really important, because confidence comes because you know what you're doing. Yeah. And getting over the nervousness helps. It helps to know what you're doing to practice. Now, Edigo, you've got a question here. What is your advice for freestyle speaking? Are you talking about impromptu speaking, Eddie? Yeah, okay. Right, impromptu speaking. The most difficult of the lot, right? First of all, usually they'll give you a minute to prepare at least, right? Although once when I was younger days, I did an impromptu speech without taking any time. But already in impromptu speaking, I had got some idea of what was my position, what was my stance, what was my story in my head. I think of that first before I start the detail. Then I think of the hook, back to the earlier question. The hook related to the story itself. Then I will think of an image. So that's what I do when someone says to me, here's an impromptu speech. And it happens to me in my job sometimes here where someone says, oh, we didn't tell you, but we want you to give a speech. Okay. So what's my storyline? What's my hook to support it? And what's an image that I can weave in to that impromptu speech? So I've noticed I've only said 3 main things, and using 3s is another good way of organizing your thinking with both impromptu speaking. things in groups of threes have been proven for listener perception, to make for a clear message that they're hearing. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Eddie. Okay, any last questions? We've got time for just one more, right, Naomi? Just one.
We have until 10:50. So
okay.
there's one from Karen Nanchit. How do I overcome the tendency of frequently saying
and the big Malaysian one, Karanjit, the big Malaysian one is okay. And right.
I have that.
And a lot of it comes from like that. So we have Malay and Manglish getting in the way. Now, practice and do an or counter. If you know of any, we have on Sunway campus, we have a Toastmasters group. Toastmasters are very good on this one because it is usually to do with the fact that we're not quite sure or we're nervous. Sometimes people can have what we call a verbal tick, all right? And this can be something that they don't always know, all right? And so this is something that really they're not aware of until either they record themselves, all right? Or they get someone else to comment on it, all right? I think you've got my message. So practice and maybe record yourself and be aware of how much you do it. And also then script yourself a bit more. So you don't have the, and some people have what we call verbal tics. I once had a university lecturer who did this and did it so often that after the second lecture, the whole class had organized themselves and she said, now I'd like to share something important. And the lecture hall of 200 students went, she got the message. Now, what if I'm not as passionate about something as I might sound? Is there any way to improve it? What if I'm not as passionate about something as I might sound? Is there any way to improve it?
Like faking it, is it?
Anushree, what if I'm not as passionate about something as I might sound? Well, why did you choose that to talk about, Anushree? If you're usually given a topic that's general, right? So research it a bit more or find something that you really believe in, because you can't kid an audience, although politicians try to, but most of them don't do a very good job. Because if you don't really believe something, if you don't think it's important, it will come through in the non-verbals in a big way. Okay? Any more, Naomi? Because you know
I think that's the, yeah, we will take that as the last question, and then we have 2 more minutes. So let me share my slide. Hold on, everyone. Okay. So thank you, Prof Stephen, for.
Okay, can I just make one last speech?
Can.
The question, making your speech more interactive with the audience. Actually, Kelly, it's very difficult to do very well. And you have to decide, does it help you get your message through by being interactive? Especially the use of questions to audience. You have to take care with it. But online, you give them things to do. Just like in this presentation, I took you out of my presentation to go online to look at the internet statistics. That can help online, okay? So thank you all very much for listening. That's the end of our Q&A session. Naomi has shared a link there. Yeah. So if you've got questions, you can put them in the Facebook page and I'll get in there and answer them as well. Okay. So thank you all for listening, and now back.